Hi, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Danny. And if you haven't heard, I recently announced that I am publishing my debut novel. It's called Sister Earth, and it comes out on my birthday, October 5th, 2025. So I had my heart set for many years on publishing with a traditional publisher, with a major Big Five publisher. And over the summer, I changed my mind. But like many decisions that seem sudden or unexpected, of course, there were lots of mini epiphanies happening along the way that led up to the change of heart. So in this podcast, I'm going to talk through my thoughts on book publishing, the industry, how I've shifted my thinking around that, how the industry itself is changing, as well as some of the larger themes from collective astrology, how our world is shifting, and then also some of the personal reasons related to my own journey with writing and getting my work out into the world and my writing career, and how that led me to my decision. So first, let's start out with a little bit of background. So I've wanted to write books my whole life. Back in college, I studied business because I was trying to be practical, but I interned for a literary agent. I wanted to understand the business because I knew deep in my bones that writing books was what I wanted to do. I've always known that since childhood. So I had that experience. I understood how the publishing industry worked from that age, that there were just loads of people pitching agents with their books, and then the agent would work on it. I actually got to help edit a book that later went out to get pitched to publishers. That book didn't sell, but another book by that author did. So I knew how that process worked, and I knew that it was a very long process, that you have to write the book first and then you pitch it to agents, and that could take a year. Then the agent works on it. That can take another year. And then when the publisher buys it, there's at least a year that the publisher is working with you on edits and on marketing and preparing the book. So it's a long process, and that was always a bit of a frustration. Actually, my first startup was Read This Next, and it was a book recommendations app. I was working on that starting around 2012, 2013. Within that idea was that I would eventually be able to publish books as well. So I would first recommend books and then be kind of a destination to find books. And then eventually I would kind of innovate on the whole, publishing industry, because I always just had that sense that it felt like it took a while to get your book from one place to the next. And I wanted to make that happen a little bit more smoothly and with a little bit less red tape. So that's always been an instinct that I've had. I went on to have a career in journalism and content marketing, always working on either my own startups or on writing on the side. And so I've had my short stories published in literary magazines. It's another one of those things that you send out, hundreds of submissions and expect to get maybe a 1% acceptance rate. It's really exciting to get that and to have your work validated by the industry. And it took me a while to develop my writing so that it was of that level that I was starting to get into literary magazines. I also published a memoir back in 2017. So I've had some experience with self-publishing. With that memoir, I had started to write a longer book and decided to write kind of a shorter version. So it's less than 100 pages. It's not a traditionally structured book. It's much shorter. So it's a quick read, but it was something that I wanted to put out there because it's about my experience with religion and intimacy, and it's a topic that I felt like people were not talking about enough, and I wanted to get my story out there so that it would help people. It's a really great read. I'm glad that it's out there, and it's been cool to have people respond to that. It also gave me that experience with producing a book on, the technical side of uploading it to Amazon and all the different technical things you need to figure out to do that, but also how to present it. This podcast itself was launched with that book. And so it gave me a lot of experience with hosting events and creating marketing content, and of course the podcast itself. So I had that experience. But with my novels, I was very set on wanting a traditional publisher. I wrote my first novel in 2021, and I queried agents. I queried 100 agents because I felt like it was a numbers game and that the right person would resonate with the book. And I got a good number of agents requesting to read the manuscript based on my email, my query letter. So good at marketing, good at story concepts, but ultimately, once they had a chance to read either part or full manuscript, they did not make an offer. So I went after that and hired an editor to help me understand why the book itself wasn't getting to the next phase. And that dramatically improved my writing. It helped me understand kind of some habits I had that I wasn't able to see myself, that were kind of holding the story back. So taking that feedback, I wrote another novel in 2023, and this one was Sister Earth. And when I finished it, I did query a couple agents. I had some friends read it and give me some feedback. And I submitted chapters of it to some contests. And one of them actually longlisted an excerpt. And at that point, I knew it was a much better book. One of the agents I queried read part of it and requested the rest of it. And that's something that had never happened with my first novel. The agents I queried would either read the query letter and request the whole thing or request part of it. But once they had some of it, they never requested more. So I had a few cues that this was a different book, a very different book. And I knew myself from my experience writing it that I just had a much greater command of what I was doing. But from there, I didn't necessarily go hard on the querying again. I had such a bad experience with querying so many people before and getting rejected. And I think I kind of knew that I wanted to make some changes. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more in terms of where the editing comes into the process when you write a book. But I was finished with the book, but I was just sitting on it. And that takes us to about last May. So it had been about a year and a half since I finished writing. And a couple things happened that led me to change my mind and to actually very quickly put things in motion to self-publish on my birthday, which was only a couple months away, giving me a short time to make the final revisions and then also start doing promotions and announcing it and everything like that. So now I'm going to get into all of these mini revelations that led up to that point and why I decided that it was important to publish on my 40th birthday. So we are going to get into the changes in the publishing industry and some astrology and some personal stories. And it's my hope that if you have a book that you are considering publishing, or if you're even just considering writing a book, sometimes what holds people back is not knowing how they'll get it published and what the options are. So I hope that this helps you make your own decisions and really see yourself in my story. So let's first get into the changing industry. So as I mentioned, I'm not new to the publishing industry. I had worked for a literary agent, always had an idea of, what that process was and the different levels of curation that are happening between the agent and then the publisher themselves. So something that some people don't know is that the editor at the publishing house doesn't necessarily do a lot of heavy editing. Maybe that used to be the case, but the editor at the publisher is more so acquiring books that fit their taste and quality level, but they want the books to be pretty much good to go. What's actually happening is that the agent is doing rounds of edits with the author. So even back in It was actually back in 2008 when I interned for the literary agent, and we did multiple rounds of editing with this author that we were working with. And so that was more comprehensive. And that's been true of my friends who are published by a traditional Big Five. It's the agent that's going back and forth with them on revisions, getting the book into really good shape, and then it's going to the publisher. And then the publisher, the editor at the publisher, might be making some edits, recommendations. They're the ones who will decide what the title is. They get, some creative control there in terms of how the book is presented, to which market, and so on. But there's not a lot of deep editing happening at that point. And so you really, even if you're going with a traditional publisher, you want the book to be in really good shape. So a lot of authors are hiring their own editors before they even go to agents. So there's a couple things happening. There's a couple layers happening of editing. And something that I've increasingly noticed as I read a lot of debut novels that come out, especially when they hit the bestseller list, I'm always curious, what they're doing right. And I've been surprised increasingly that some of these books that are coming out just seem like they needed a little bit more editing. Obviously, if a book is hitting the bestseller list and is, published by a major publisher, the author is doing a lot of things right. So there's a lot of talent there. But especially the more that I work on my own craft, the more I can tell when I read a book if I'm losing interest or if I'm not following the plot, if it's because of a craft issue, which could be fixed in editing, but for various reasons was not. And there's a couple things going on here. And one of the main ones is that publishers are increasingly understaffed and just don't have the capacity to maybe do as much editing as they would like. So something that you would sort of historically expect publishers to help with is the editorial process is not happening maybe the same way that it used to. And so increasingly authors are having to hire outside help anyway. Something else with publishers that's been shifting increasingly is how much marketing the publishers do. I would say even back in 2008, when I worked for that agent, that was the case then, as it is now, that there are some books that the publisher expects to be a really big deal, that they're pouring most of their marketing money into. But for most books, there's not a lot of support. So the author might be having to reach out to bookstores to plan their own book tour. They might have to fund their own flights or their own transportation. And a lot of the marketing might fall on the author. So that's another thing that you think going through, the benefit of going through publishers, that they would help with the editing, that they would help with the marketing, but actually those things are not necessarily happening. Not for most of the authors that are getting represented. So then I started to spend more time in author communities, both some in-person meetups where I am now in Southern California, but also online through various writing classes that I've taken. And I started to meet people who were not traditionally published, as well as people who had been traditionally published but had switched to self-publishing, which is also called indie publishing. What I started to notice was the people who were making six figures as an author, or the people who were fully supporting themselves with their author career, were the ones who were indie, not the ones who were traditional. Traditionally published authors tend to work as university professors. They tend to do coaching and teaching. They tend to continue their freelance writing career, whatever it is. And they also tend to publish less frequently. So maybe if an author's books are doing really well, they tend to publish maybe every other year. But a lot of authors maybe have like a 3-year or 5-year gap in between books. And when I started to ask about that, what I was hearing was that the author might be able to write books more frequently than that, but the publisher doesn't necessarily want a book as frequently. So that tends to limit your income. What some authors do is maybe they'll write an adult book and then they'll write a middle grade book. And then because it's different markets, then the publisher, they can actually work with different publishers. But in general, there's more of an opening that they could have books coming out more frequently. But still, there's kind of like this rate limiting issue that happens because the publisher doesn't necessarily want a book maybe as frequently as you could write it. Whereas the authors that are indie, a lot of them tend to be writing genre, so that's romance or thrillers or mysteries, and a lot more of them tend to write series. So it's a different type of reader and a different reader behavior. But when they are a reader who's reading a lot of books and also likes to binge read through a series, maybe fantasy is another genre that might fall into there. It's different reader behavior, and so you have the space to write more books and publish more frequently and build on your audience, because they find one book and then they read the rest of the series, and then they go through what other books you have, and then they keep going. So there's a benefit in terms of publishing more frequently if you're indie published. And then there's also the profit margin per book. So if you are traditionally published, you are making roughly $1 per book. Once we take out what the agent gets, what the publisher gets, what your royalty is, and this is after, because you might get the advance up front, but once you sell enough to pay through the advance, which some authors never do that anyway, but once you do, then per unit, you're making about $1. Slightly more for hardcover. There's a lot of variables, but that's a rough estimate. If you publish yourself, you make about $3. That might not sound like a big difference, but it really is. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First is just to make that six figures or whatever your income goal is for your author business, your author career. It's a multiple of 3. So, to make $1 million, you only need to sell a third of 1 million books versus selling 1 million copies. It's a dramatic difference in terms of, reaching those numbers. Then there's also the question of promotions. So particularly the authors I met who had been traditionally published for a large part of their career, they had actually acquired their books back. So the publisher had the rights to their books, but they, and these books, they had maybe like 40 books that had been, written, launched, promoted. It's their backlist now. They're books they're old essentially, but they're novels. They're not timely in any sense. It's just that they're already out. So the publisher is not putting any promotions behind these. They're just kind of sitting there. But for the authors, if they are continuing to promote new books that they have coming out, they want people to read these. If they're only making $1 per copy, that's not very much. If they're putting a lot of effort, whether that's like hosting events or actually doing paid advertising, whatever it is, it's going to cost them some money. And so if they're doing this effort to promote, but they're only making $1, they're actually making money for the publisher, but they're doing all the work. The publisher is not doing any of the work at this point. And then there's also an issue of like actually getting permission from the publisher to do some promotions, which is another, tricky thing that I don't know a lot about, but that was also a blocker for them. So what they wanted to do is get the rights back from the publisher. And then now they're making $3 per sale versus $1. And so if it is on average costing them $2 to sell a book and they are only making $1, then they're losing money every book they sell. But if it costs them $2 to sell a book and they're making $3, then they're making money on each book they sell. So it all of a sudden turns into a very different game. So that's another check in the pros list for indie publishing. Those are some questions in terms of the amount of marketing you're willing to do, which increasingly both traditional and indie authors have to do marketing. The editing, both indie and traditional, have to increasingly invest in editing. And then there's the pace, which I talked a little bit about. How quickly can you and do you want to write books? I used to think that one book every other year was kind of as fast as I could go. I've got loads of ideas for books, but truthfully, it takes me about 3 months to do a first draft, but then I need to take some time away from it before I can work on it again. I kind of need to clear my mind, let the dust settle. That's been how both of my books were, that I needed some time away, and then I came back to it with a lot of new ideas. But I could also work on other things in between. So even though maybe I'd work for 3 months and then not work on it for a year, I might be working on other things during that time. And increasingly, I've been open to my books being in a series. So particularly certain ideas seem to play well for that. So the more confident I've gotten with my pace of writing, the more open I've been to seeing myself as releasing books more frequently. So when I ask my students and my clients whether they want to traditionally or indie publish, these are some of the questions I ask: the frequency of writing, and what they want the traditional publisher for. Is it the industry validation, the respect that comes with it? Is it specifically the money, the advance that they get? Is it the wider audience that they're able to reach? Is it the marketing support? Or is it the editorial partnership? And I found that most of these things can be created on your own. Obviously, you're not, if you're indie published, you might not be able to say, I was published by XYZ, but you can hire a really good editor and have a really well-written book that is the same quality or even higher storytelling craft than what's coming out of the major publishers. And increasingly, I'm finding that media is open to reviewing books that are indie published. So you can even get some of that industry validation through maybe getting one of the major media publications to review your book. So there are other options for all of these things. One of the sticky questions for me was always the film rights, because my book ideas are kind of these, what we call high concept, very fantastical, imagined worlds, and really just original ideas. And I always wanted to see them on screen. And so I felt like if I published with a traditional publisher, I would have my literary agent, and then generally the publisher has connections with film agents. And so there's kind of a natural pathway to selling the film rights. However, what I also know is that a book can sell the film rights and then just sit there for maybe a decade. One of my favorite books that I read 10 or 15 years ago is only recently being made into a TV show. And that is fairly common. So what I also see authors doing, authors who have had a big hit, is the author will actually produce the film and do a lot of the work and finding the actors, the director, and getting everything in motion. So it's it's like anything else. There's so much red tape to get published. There's also that those same hoops to jump through in the film industry. It's not necessarily fast. And so sometimes it does come down to, if you want to see it in a film, then you're going to have to do the work there as well. So even though that was a reason for me for a long time, it's actually not a very valid reason. So I had to kind of accept that. The last question for me was about quality. I really wanted to be proud of what I released. And for that reason, I'm really glad that my first book failed with the query, because once I had written that book, I was like, either this is a total mess or it's the most brilliant thing that's ever been written. Like, it's one of those, but I don't know which one it is. It's really hard to see your own work objectively. So I'm really glad that I had that widespread rejection from agents because it convinced me that there was something lacking in the writing. And I don't know that I would have been able to look critically enough at my own writing to improve it without that rejection. So it definitely was a very difficult time getting, very expensive investment into developmental editing, and then realizing how some of my writing instincts were making the story hard to follow. But that is what helped me to then learn and then improve for the next book. So I think that was a really good part of the process that helped me to improve my own writing. And ultimately, with Sister Earth, I wanted to be proud of the quality of it and to put something out that I felt like, even if I was putting it out myself, that it was on the same level as books that are being traditionally published. So when I found my developmental editor by chance through Instagram, and the fact that she specialized in exactly the qualities that were weak within my writing, it really felt like a sign. And I knew that if I could get her developmental edits on my book, that I could get it to the level that I wanted, so that I didn't need to have a big publisher behind me, but that I would feel proud releasing it out into the world. So those are some of the questions that I thought through in terms of the publishing industry that led me towards self-publishing Sister Earth. But now I want to get into what the real reasons are. Because, like I said, anytime you make a big decision, there's always a bunch of mini decisions leading up to it. And yes, there's a lot that I learned about the publishing industry over the years and through the process of writing these two novels. But what was also going on the inside was the inner work, and particularly around manifestation. So I started manifesting officially right when I finished that first novel, because I was like, I want this to be my career. I want to sell this book to a publisher. I want to make a ton of money, and then I want to be able to use that money to live so I can keep writing books. It's never really about fame or money. It's just about, I want to keep writing books, and I feel like this is the way to do it. So I got into manifestation. I read a book by Joe Dispenza. I eventually joined a online community called To Be Magnetic, which is super helpful. More recently, I've started following a teacher named Brie Melanson. I would say those are the three most influential teachers in terms of this manifestation journey that I've been on. But there have been a couple different phases as I've gotten to know myself more, because manifestation is not just about kind of setting an outcome and then figuring out how to get to it. Maybe what people know as law of attraction was a little bit more focused on the external. But through the teachers that I've followed and through the work that I've done, I found that it is both tuning into a desire, understanding what it is that you want, but also listening to intuition. So there's an action part of it, and there's also a reception part of it. And when you can get aligned onto what I would call what your soul wants, what the soul path is, and you're able to both listen and act towards it, that's when you get the smoothest path to the outcome that will actually make you happy. Because this is the problem with kind of the traditional manifestation or law of attraction, is that people could figure out how to get the thing that they wanted, and then they would get it, but they would not be satisfied. So if you want to actually be satisfied with the outcome, you have to really listen to what your soul actually wants, which is not always the same thing. So it's not that there's anything wrong with the things we want. We just have to kind of listen into them a little bit more to make sure we're actually going to get out of it the thing that is the most meaningful. So this thing I wanted was the book deal. And as I did these hypnosis recordings, journal questions, meditations, breath work, all these different practices. I also did a month-long microdosing experience that included a soul retrieval ceremony. And that was pretty early on, actually. And I wanted to bring that one up because I had a pretty profound realization during that experience. So microdosing kind of just helps heighten your intuition. And then the soul retrieval is kind of like a meditative experience. So it was during that I really leaned into, why do I want the book deal? What is it that I think that a book deal is going to give me? What is that emotion or experience beyond the material? So what is it going to give me intrinsically? And what I found was that I really wanted permission to enjoy my own humor. And it took me a lot of work to get to that. But really what was going on was that I was, in terms of writing and my career, I was always putting out what I thought other people would like. And I had my own humor, my own expression that I was starting to put into short stories and into novels. But I felt like I needed the validation of the publisher, but also the validation of the book being like a bestseller. Like I needed like a lot of people to read it and love it. And then I needed to like have a book event where people were coming to me and telling me how meaningful it was. And once that happened, then it felt safe for me to be like, yeah, this is funny. Like that's what was going on. I needed all of this outside validation so that I could enjoy my own humor. And it didn't feel safe otherwise. So it was kind of what ends up happening is these things kind of get backwards, where we're waiting for everyone else to tell us that something's funny. But it's like, especially with a book and how long it takes to write one, like you have to kind of like enjoy your own humor through the process in order to create something that then will resonate with other people. So that was a pretty big breakthrough. So I understood that. And I think that helped me a lot when I was writing Sister Earth, which again was the second novel that I wrote. The first one still never published. Another breakthrough I had was around this memory of drawing a picture. And my mom's response to it was, she kind of pointed out something that was wrong with it and kind of laughed and then was like, oh, that's cute. But this particularly came up because I was questioning with that first book that I queried, no one made an offer for. Like, I just felt like I was rushing into needing the validation right away, when it was like, it's just a very normal thing to have your first novel that you query not get an agent. That's probably the more common. And then, if you keep working on it, you can eventually get to what you want. So when I looked at that emotional quality of feeling like I needed the first book out of the gate to get the major book deal right away, that emotion mirrored the emotion of sitting down in my room that afternoon, drawing, having never drawn portraits before. I drew portraits of my whole family, and then getting the rejection. So it was like my nervous system was like playing out the same track, repeating it in a new way, as if to fix it. And so when I understood that, I understood that that there was something about seeking a publisher that was trying to kind of fix this lack of love that I felt in that moment with my mom. That doesn't necessarily mean that working with a publisher is not something I would ever do, or that is the wrong path necessarily, but it helped me understand that as long as I was trying to fix that historical wound, that I was kind of gonna just keep getting the same results, that I had to give myself the validation and the affection that I needed. Or, like I was saying, if I did get the validation from the publisher, it ultimately wouldn't be satisfying because the wound would still be there. So I would still be looking for an additional kind of validation. So the manifestation work really pointed towards this wound around external validation and really made me question if I was getting what I really wanted by going that route. Because if the issue is a lack of confidence, so let me put it this way. Your soul comes into the lifetime in order to learn things, not necessarily to accomplish things. So like it's very capitalistic to be like, my soul wants to write a book. Like the soul is like whatever. The soul wants to learn confidence or self-expression. The soul is more into what it can learn through a process, not necessarily like what is produced. So if getting a publisher gave me validation, then my soul wouldn't have to learn confidence. So it's kind of one of those things where it's the reverse of what you expect it to be. In order to learn confidence, I would have to face rejection over and over again in order to build the confidence. And then once I build the confidence, then it's like whatever outcome I do is going to make me happy no matter what, because I've actually built the confidence. So that's what I learned from manifestation, that if I wanted to act on my soul's true needs, that I needed to decouple my attachment to the outcome of a traditional book deal. Then there's the psychic readings. So there's a couple different ways that I've explored kind of intuitive guidance for making decisions. And there's intuitive readers, and when you do a session with an intuitive reader, they're generally asking your guides for support or for help. And then there's also hypnosis sessions where you're with a facilitator, and so they help you get into a state of hypnosis, but then you are the one who is speaking, but they get you into a deep enough state where it's your soul or your higher self that's speaking through you. And so there was one particular experience I had with a practitioner who does QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique. And I won't get totally into it in this podcast, but basically we get into deep enough hypnosis where he is able to ask me a series of questions that I had written beforehand, and a lot of them related to my career, to writing, to other areas of life. And it's a really interesting state to be in because you are consciously aware of what you're doing, where you are. It's like you're not gone, and he's recording it just in case you don't remember, but you're still there. But it's like he asked a question, and sometimes he'd ask a question and I would just start talking, and I would be saying things that I've never thought before that were just like really wise and smart. And I was like, oh, huh. And then other times he'd ask a question and I'd feel just kind of stuck, and I would just say like, I'm not getting anything for that. Sometimes he'd ask a question and I would get like a picture, like he asked something and I was like, I'm getting ice cream. Like, I don't know what that means. So there are varying ways that the information would come through. And sometimes he'd ask a question and I would say what sounded like the most obvious thing in the world. Ultimately, what really made me trust the whole process and the whole session was that when he asked, the question is working with a traditional publisher, the path for my writing career. And I felt my whole body just kind of go blah, like, and it was just like the clearest, like, no. And I was so sad. Like, I was just so sad in the moment. And it wasn't what I wanted the answer to be at all. And there were other questions that we asked that I absolutely got, a great answer that I wanted, or a really surprising one that was really off the wall. So there was a huge variation in terms of like what kinds of responses came through. This was the one that I really didn't want it to be the answer, but I just could not deny that was what was coming through. And because of that, it really helped me to trust even the other answers that I got in that session, because it definitely was not something where I was just in like a loopy state and saying what I wanted to hear. Like, it was not that. So at that point, it kind of, it kind of made me feel like I was at like a dead end, because if traditional publishing wasn't the route, I was kind of like, well, I wanted to get like the book advanced so that I can keep writing and so on and so forth. Because here's how I had it framed in my head. Traditional publishing, I get an advance and then I get book sales, and that's going to help me to keep writing. Indie publishing, I'm going to have to write like 20 books or 40 books before I start making a decent income, because that's kind of the example that I had modeled, that you have to kind of build up your body of work in order to attract readers. And once you do, you get repeat readers coming back. But that both paths seem to just take a lot of time. And so neither of them seemed like they were going to get me where I wanted to go, which is just writing full time, what I was trying to get to. But I kind of just saw them both as dead ends, especially once I did the session, and felt like, the response was like, traditional publishing is not the path. But I also did, over the past, I would say 5 years, I've done a handful of intuitive sessions where I've asked for guidance about a lot of other things too, but always mainly my writing career. And every single one of them has just given me like, this full speed ahead, like, yes, this is absolutely it. There was particularly one of them where I was kind of in between, like, should I be working on the book or should I be working on my spiritual business, which is astrology, energy healing, and I do writing coaching now as well. And she was kind of like, yeah, I don't really see anything for that. And then she was like, for the book, like, I see you like at the beach, you're earning royalties, like everything's great. And so I repeatedly got this message that this was the future. I was in a group session once where we got to do partner readings. So, it was, someone who is not an intuitive reader, who has no real experience doing this, but it was just like an intuitive practice we did together. And she was like, I see you like with you've got like a car trunk that's full of books. It's like all your book. And this was a couple of years ago. So just, in big and little ways, it always came through very positive for me writing, but I just was always questioning. And I think it was because I was always like, well, I've got to get a traditional publisher, and I feel like it's not happening. And so really what was happening is not that the path was ever closed, but it was more of like a me against me, where I just couldn't wrap my mind around there being another option. Ultimately, if my intuition was saying, yes, writing books is a great path for you, and it was also saying not traditional publishing, then there is kind of one really obvious pathway that I could go on. It's just going to require me to face some fears around, promoting my book myself. So those are some of the more spiritual and metaphysical reasons that led me towards self-publishing Sister Earth. Now I want to talk about the astrology. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple things here. A little bit of basic astrology and a little bit of advanced astrology. First, collectively, this relates to everyone. We're shifting from Pluto in Capricorn to Pluto in Aquarius. And you might have heard the term the age of Aquarius, which is actually kind of like a more, a larger theme. Basically, Capricorn is like institutions, like banks, the government, traditional publishers, all of these like long-standing institutions. Aquarius is more about innovation, technology, but also groups, like self-governing, self-organizing groups. The last time, and then Pluto. So Pluto is power and death and rebirth. The last time that Pluto moved from Capricorn to Aquarius, one of the big major world events was the Revolutionary War. The United States shifting from being governed by an institution, the monarchy, into being like a, self-governed colonies at the time. And of course, now we're in an entirely new cycle, but those same themes are coming back. When it comes to entertainment, the predictions that a lot of astrologers have been making is that we will see less of these like major big budget films and more indie produced types of films. And that will apply to other forms of entertainment as well, music, and certainly books. I think that we are already seeing this, definitely with the publishing industry. Indie publishing was new like 20 years ago, and it's grown a lot. But increasingly, I'm seeing, like I said, people who have been traditionally published shifting to being indie published, or even doing a little bit of both. Maybe they're publishing one genre with a traditional publisher and then maybe publishing a different genre on their own. So there's increasingly like a lot more options there. And I do think that this is going to continue. And particularly, my prediction is that we'll see the power shift from traditional publishers to sort of networks or groups. So it's not about just, indie publishing is kind of like you're your own business, you're on your own. But this is already the case with a lot of romance authors, that they do like newsletter swaps, that they're supporting each other's growth. But I think we could see more groups crop up, whether it's like an independent publisher where they're providing editing in kind of the same way, or it's more just like a cooperative of authors that are maybe sharing resources and helping each other promote, and kind of recreating some of the benefits of working with a publisher, but just within more of like a self-organizing group. So less top-down and more kind of by the people for the people. So that's something I'm excited about continuing to explore, and maybe even experimenting on my own and helping other authors find a way to publish their books. So that is the collective astrology that's going on. That kind of got me excited about being part of kind of a new process in these changing times. There's also some more advanced techniques that I looked at. Of course, anytime I make a decision, I have to take a little peek at the astrology and see what's good. So first is the solar return. So the solar return is a chart that is based on your birthday. So your birth chart is what the stars and planets were doing the exact moment that you're born. And then every year, the sun comes back to the exact same point. And so you take a transit chart. The sun is at the exact same point it was when you were born, but all the other planets are doing what they're doing now. And basically that chart gives you a preview of your year. So my solar return chart this year for October 5th, 2025, I have a Virgo ascendant. So in my natal chart, I have Venus and Mars in Virgo, but not in my top 3 necessarily. And so your ascendant of your solar return chart tells you your temperament and focus for the year. Like Gemini is like the writer and Virgo's the editor. They're both a little bit literary of all the signs. To me, that indicates that writing and editing would be kind of the forefront, maybe more largely communication. And Virgo also is kind of analytical and has an association with healing, which I'm going to get to in a second, because that was a larger theme. And then we also look at the ruler of the rising sign. So Virgo rising, Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is in the second house in Libra. So the second house is about confidence and self-worth, and Libra is about balance and beauty. So we're kind of pairing together, and Libra and the second house both have kind of an association with money/luxury. So with Mercury there's also that overlap of like the writing and the money and like the beauty. And so that all felt really themed with the book in terms of this being a year that I was putting myself out there and being known as a writer. So having that ascendant that is in Virgo. Another placement that stuck out to me on this chart was so we look at the natal chart placements on the solar return chart. So we're looking at 2 charts together. So my natal Chiron is in Gemini, and that was exactly same degree as the midheaven. So the midheaven is the top point of the chart, kind of like where noon would be essentially. And it it represents reputation and career. And I mean, it was just like a really tight conjunction, first of all, to have any planet right on one of the angles. But Chiron and Gemini, I often associate that with writing because Chiron is the wounded healer. So it's this idea that whatever our deepest core wound is also what we help others heal from. And the fact that it's in Gemini, I talk a lot about writing to heal and healing to write. That's always, it's really just like in my chart that's an association, but I really find that through my writing, whether it's my memoir, which was obviously about my personal story, but my novels even more so, are just going deeper in my psyche. It's a made up world. It's, kind of fantasy, but like it really is exploring the deepest levels of the psyche when you write a novel. And so it's helped bring a lot of subconscious healing to the surface for me. And when people read this book, they are going to have the same experience. So with Chiron on the midheaven, it's really indicating this is a year that both my reputation and being known as a healer, but having this like writing and healing combination be really to the forefront and to really have that seen on a wider scale. So those two placements really kind of indicated that this was the year. This was a good year to be putting writing out into the world and being seen and recognized for it. The second one is something called zodiacal releasing. And this is more advanced astrology. And I will be very honest, I'm not an expert at this. There's a great podcast on Chris Brennan's The Astrology Podcast on zodiacal releasing. There's some great blog posts out there as well. So I'm going to try to explain it in the most basic way possible, but it's not something that's easily simplified. But it's kind of a more mathematical way to do predictive astrology. So it's not based on where the planets are now or where they're moving, the transits, anything like that. It's based on your chart, and then there's different ways to categorize the different signs, and then each sign has a number associated with it that gets mapped out, like, again, very mathematically as like a number of days, a number of weeks, a number of months. And so there's these different periods, and there's 4 levels of them. So some of these periods are like several years long. Those are like more shifting major themes. But you can also drill down to periods within the periods that are a couple months long, and then the shortest ones are like a couple of days long. But each of these periods is going to have a quality associated with it based on a bunch of other things in your chart. So everyone's different, but for me, so for everyone, a period can be positive or negative, and it can be important or less important. And then those are 2 different things. So because of the way my chart is, my peak periods, so a peak period is like a high activity period. Every 3rd period is going to be high activity. All of my high activity periods are going to be negative. and then I have a like middle activity period that's positive, and then one that's just neutral. That's basically what it is. So there's these peak periods that you expect to be like high activity. And then of the peak periods, every once in a while, you get something called a loosening of the bond. Don't know why it's called that. It's shortened to LB. But it's basically like a big turning point. So not only is there a peak period, but there's, when it's marked that way, it's also like a big turning point, closure, or, closing things off to start something new. Of the LB, there's a period like the cycle before it that is a foreshadow for it. So I was learning this 2 years ago, 2023, looking at my chart, or looking at my periods that I had coming up. And this October, on my birthday, October 5th, 2025, I start one of those peak periods that's also an LB. And it goes for about a year. So it's like, of the 4 levels, I think it's the top level. So it's pretty significant. And then the foreshadow period for it was back in 2017. And that was, it overlaps when I was writing my memoir, publishing my memoir, also met someone I dated. My grandpa died, had a bunch of toxic stuff happening at my day job, a lot of stuff going on. And it definitely fit the interpretation of this. It was very high activity. There was a lot of stuff going on, and a good number of it was not that pleasant. Some of it was really pleasant, but yeah, there was a lot going on. So when I saw that and saw the association, I thought, it would make sense that if that's when I published that book, that maybe this is when I publish my novel. And that was back in 2023 when I was doing that interpretation. And I kind of wrote down, like, maybe this is when I published the book. My assumption at that point was that I would find an agent and have a book deal and be publishing the book with a publisher. So when over the summer, I looked back at those notes, I thought, isn't that funny that that's what I predicted? Obviously, that's not happening, but I could still publish it myself because I do still see this being a good time for that based on what that foreshadow period was. And in fact, maybe it fits even a little bit better because I did self-publish the memoir. So find that really interesting. And I don't think that the peak periods have anything to do with your birthday. I think it's just a total chance that peak period begins on my 40th birthday. But that's why it stuck out to me. And so that's another reason why the birthday felt like a good day to publish. All right, we've got one more in astrology, and it's one of my favorites to look at and talk about, and that's the progressed moon. So the progressed moon, this is, again, a little more of advanced astrology, but the progressed moon, basically what we do is we take where the moon is moving in the days after your birth, and each day becomes a year. So basically, like, where the moon goes, 30 days after your birthday is your 30th year when you're age 30. So everything is just stretched out. And I don't know who came up with this. I don't know how they figured it out. But basically, the moon phases and the signs and the houses the moon moves through are these emotional eras that you move through. So, like, regularly, a moon phase lasts a couple days. The progressed moon moves so much slower, so it lasts like a couple years. So every 28 to 30 years, you go through a full cycle where the moon has made it through all the houses and the signs and all the phases. There's a great post I wrote about this for Refinery 29 on Taylor Swift's progressed moon, and it fits the interpretations so perfectly. It's super fascinating. But what I noticed over the summer as well is that my progressed moon is getting ready to cross my ascendant. And that happens in late September. So my birthday is October 5th, about a week or two before the progressed moon crosses the ascendant. And so that means right now the progressed moon is in my 12th house. Stephen Forrest has a great blog post on the progressed moon in your 12th house if you want to look that up. Maybe I can get it into the show notes. But basically, that's a time where everything in your life is dying off, where you need to go within, listen to your heart. Despite what the external seems to imply, it's a time to tune in and start to dream into what's coming next. That's when progressed moon is in the 12th house. But when it crosses the ascendant and moves into the first house, then there's a time when you can be thrust into the spotlight. So if that's happening in late September, then it seems, again, like that would be a good time to really work with the planets and choose how I want to be thrust into the spotlight. Because if you think about it, that's not necessarily a positive thing. And this is my philosophy on astrology, is that we get a lot of influence about how we experience the different transits. It's like riding waves. It's like we get to decide if we're going to work with it or against it. So rather than just, biting my nails and seeing what happens. I can choose that I actually have something that I want to be in the spotlight in a developmental way. And that is publishing something that's very close to my heart that I've been working on for a long time. That is really me capitalizing on these different phases of astrology and making the most of the energy that I have. When I came to this conclusion, it was around May or June. It gave me not very much time to get my book ready for October. But I think I mentioned this. I really, by chance, was connected with a developmental editor who had the exact background that I felt like my book needed. I basically decided that I would publish on my birthday, but I gave myself time to revise just to be sure that I could get my revisions done. And I held off on announcing. So by the time I announced the book, revisions were done, and I was confident that I was going to be able to get everything ready to go by October 5th, including this podcast, because as part of releasing the book, I really wanted to be transparent with my thinking behind it, so that people could understand why, after all these years saying I was going to wait for a publisher, why I decided to do it this way instead. One last note before I close is that I want to talk a little bit about the 40th birthday, turning 40 and leading up to that. Because like I said, there's the very practical concerns of working with a publisher. There's the spiritual underlyings, the cosmic underlyings of this decision. And those are always the reasons we give people for why we make decisions. But I do think that every decision comes down deep within. And then we ascribe a logical reason to it once our heart has decided. So what I want to say in closing is that over the summer, as I looked forward on the calendar and saw my birthday coming up, and that it is a threshold moment birthday, turning 40, and I thought, what would I want to do that day that would make me so happy? Because I don't know that the past couple of years have gone the way that I've planned. I don't know that I'm in the place that I expected I would be at age 40. I definitely thought that I would have a committed romantic partner. I was always a little bit undecided about whether I wanted to have kids. And actually, that is really the basis, or one of the questions in the book. It really starts out with a character who, in a society that's obsessed with motherhood, is not sure that she wants to do the thing. She's not sure. Sister Earth is also about returning to childhood, both literally and figuratively, in order to become a mother. So I think it has kind of a natural tie-in with birthdays. And I hope that this episode has been helpful in terms of thinking through your own decisions around publishing and the potential paths and some of the unconscious questions that come up along the way. Thank you for following along with my story, and I can't wait for you to read Sister Earth out on October 5th.